So, I've thought of a title for this series of videos I've been making looking at the Democratic Party in the past, and I've decided to call it Stolen Valor, the History of the Democratic Party. So if you're not familiar, stolen valor is a term applied to the phenomenon of people falsely claiming military awards or badges they did not earn, service they did not perform, prisoner of war experiences that never happened, and other tales of military derring-do that exist only in their minds. Now, I work with some guys like this. They claim to be Vietnam veterans. They claim that they were running through the jungle and that they were snipers and took out important figures, and that they did all these heroic deeds. And you come to find out they either weren't in Vietnam at all, or they did something like they offloaded pallets of meat or stores for the guys that were actually going into combat. And so this is a real common thing. It's a very dirty thing. And it's, when you look into the history of the Democratic Party, this is exactly what they're doing, is they're stealing the valor of actual civil rights heroes and claiming that it belongs to them. They're claiming that they somehow have this moral superiority or this moral high ground for something they didn't do, and in fact they are part of an organization that in many ways actively opposed civil rights in this country. So I want to go through an article. It's fairly short, and it's written by this Joe Jarvis via the Daily Bell, and he titles it, "Yes, Democrats Did Start the KKK." And so he's not a Republican or a Democrat. He says, I want people to be as critical of Democrats as they are of Republicans. He thinks both parties are really terrible, but the Democrats get a pass because they are better at branding and marketing. And I want to point this out real fast. Do notice the use of facts, statistics, numbers to make this guy's argument. This is the difference between someone writing a good argument, a good article, and someone like Matt Taibbi that just makes these cases through innuendo and creative adjectives. So, he points out the last time a Republican presidential candidate got more than 15% of the black vote was in 1960, and yet the Democrats had a former KKK member in the U.S. Senate until he died in 2010. In fact, Robert Byrd wasn't just in the KKK. He recruited 150 friends to start a chapter. Robert Byrd used a racial slur on live television in 2001 and then was reelected as senator from West Virginia in 2006. And for complete intellectual honesty, I don't know if it matters, he was saying, I know a lot of white, and then used this slur. You can watch the video if you are interested in that sort of thing. I don't really know if it matters. But this is the Democrat Party here in 2001 and winning in 2006. So keep that in mind. Compare that to the current Democrat governor from one state over, Virginia, Ralph Northam. Okay, so this is the controversy we've all heard of. He was either in blackface or in KKK robes, we don't know which, in his graduate school yearbook. And he has a funny defense. He doesn't think that's him in that picture because he only wore blackface once, and that was to dress up like Michael Jackson. So I don't know, that it's kind of this you live by the sword, die by the sword. I think the left is finding you live by the outrage, you lose your job by the outrage. Megyn Kelly discovered this. The left has stirred all this animosity and all this micro parsing of everybody's words, and then you go back in history and there's a lot of real inconvenient truths to this particular narrative. So anyway, the crux of this article is here. He says racism runs deep in the Democratic Party. This shouldn't surprise anyone who has any knowledge of history, and that's what we're trying to learn in this channel, in this playlist. But since most people get their information from memes, someone took it upon themselves to educate the masses. A bunch of Democrats wore white to Trump's State of the Union address to protest Trump, which gave birth to the following meme. I haven't seen so many Democrats in white since they started the KKK. Now, Facebook fact-checked this particular meme via PolitiFact, and they call it a pants-on-fire lie. No, the Democratic Party didn't create the Ku Klux Klan. That's actually spelled wrong. But see, here it says, I haven't seen so many Democrats in white. They say this is a false statement by claiming the Democratic Party didn't create the KKK. And so the author of this article jumps right on that. He says, you'll notice that below the meme, Facebook attached a fact check which claims the Democratic Party did not start the Ku Klux Klan. Not to get nitpicky, but the meme states that Democrats started the KKK, not the party itself. And PolitiFact's fact check rested entirely on whether or not the Democratic Party started the Klan. So this would be like saying the Republicans have an America First, Make America Great agenda, and PolitiFact would come out and say, that's a pants-on-fire lie. The Republican Party has not endorsed the America First, Make America Great Again agenda. Well, because there's never Trumpers, there's Bill Kristol, there's John McCain, Mitt Romney, those sorts of people. So yes, the entire party has not embraced the Make America Great Again, America First policies, but it is Republicans that have embraced America First. So not the party, but individuals in the party. And that's what this meme is saying. Democrats in white. And they try to refute it by saying, well, the Democrat Party didn't create the KKK. Now, I'm going to go back to our list of logical fallacies. I like to show the particular mechanics on how they being PolitiFact, how they come up with this reading here. Because there's a particular method to how they are deceiving you here, and this is to keep the false narrative going. It's called a straw man. This is a logical fallacy. It's a form of argument and an informal fallacy based on giving the impression of refuting an opponent's argument while actually refuting an argument that was not presented by that opponent. One who engages in this fallacy is said to be attacking the straw man. The typical straw man argument creates the illusion of having completely refuted or defeated an opponent's proposition through covert replacement of it with a different proposition, and the subsequent refutation of that false argument instead of the opponent's proposition. So that's what they did. PolitiFact created the illusion here. The Democrat Party and the KKK have nothing to do with each other, when in fact that's untrue. But this is the word game that they play, and they're splitting hairs here. It's called a straw man. So now you can identify that particular rhetorical tactic. So the author goes on to point out, even in the article, PolitiFact does admit, one historian confirmed there's a historic link between Democrats and the KKK. Many angry Southern whites during the 1860s and 70s, they were Democrats, and some joined the KKK. According to Michael Martinez, who wrote a book in 2007, Carpetbaggers and Cavalry and the KKK, it's misleading to say the Democratic Party founded the Klan, and it is. That's why the meme does not state that. Yet, PolitiFact confirms that the Democratic Party honored the first Grand Wizard of the KKK when he spoke at the 1868 DNC shortly after the Klan's founding. Which brings us back to the original question. Did they start the KKK? Yes, the Democrats did. It was founded as a political organization to intimidate Black and Republican voters in the South during the Reconstruction after the Civil War. And according to History.com, the KKK engaged in terrorist raids against African Americans and white Republicans at night, employing intimidation, destruction of property, assault, and murder to achieve its aims and influence upcoming elections. So, the author points out there were two political parties, and the KKK aimed to influence elections against the Republican Party. The KKK was a political tool used by the Democrats to help the Democratic Party win elections. That is the fact. So the article goes on. Another major strategy of covering up racist Democratic roots is saying that it isn't the party today that it once was. So, we've heard this now. The party flipped at some point. The Democrats get credit for Lincoln, who was a Republican, and Republicans get credit for the KKK, which was founded by Democrats. Well, when exactly did the party suddenly and miraculously switch platforms? In 1963, Democrat Governor of Alabama, George Wallace, stood blocking a doorway, refusing to allow a black girl to enter a white school that had just been desegregated by law. So in this playlist, I've done a complete audio narration here of George Wallace's Wikipedia. So if you want to learn more than you ever wanted to know about the guy, I have that in my channel. So this would make the point Democrats were still racist in 1963. So they didn't flip when they ended slavery, is his point. So that means FDR was part of the old racist Democrat Party. Big surprise, the guy who put Japanese Americans in concentration camps was racist. So, let's go further in history. Some people would say the flip occurred with the election of Lyndon Johnson in 1964. After all, George Wallace lost the primary against Johnson, which they claim is a rejection of Wallace's racism. However, they don't acknowledge that Wallace served in office until 1987. He was winning elections into the 80s, and he was famous for this stand in the schoolhouse door. This was his great moment. This was his no new taxes moment. It's how he defined himself. So, can you really claim that the parties flipped in 1964? Well, they say it came because Johnson signed into law the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Well, let's look at how the votes broke down. So, for the Civil Rights Act of 1964, 69% of Democrats in the Senate voted for the Civil Rights Act, while it had 82% Republican senators voting for it. In the House, 63% of Democrats voted for the Civil Rights Act, while 80% of Republicans supported the legislation. Now, after this, Johnson went on to push the Great Society legislation, which expanded the welfare state and social safety nets and things like that. So you might think that this was great for the disenfranchised black population, but the article cites sociologist and economist and historian Thomas Sowell. So here's Dr. Sowell. He's a great guy to listen to speak. He's very intelligent and very well read on all of these discussions. But this is Thomas Sowell. This is what he has to say here. Despite the grand myth that black economic progress began or accelerated with the passage of the civil rights laws, that was in 1964, and the war on poverty programs of 1960s, the cold fact is that the poverty rate among blacks fell from 87% in 1940 all the way down to 47% by 1960. This was before any of those programs even began. Over the next 20 years, the poverty rate among blacks fell another 18 percentage points compared to the 40.7% point drop the previous 20 years. So this highlights this was a continuation of the previous trend. Nearly 100 years after the supposed legacy of slavery found most black children being raised in two-parent families in 1960. But 30 years after the liberal welfare state found the great majority of black children being raised by a single parent. And the murder rate among blacks in 1960 was 1/2 of what it became 20 years later after a legacy of liberals' law enforcement policies. So here's the facts, here's the reasons, here's the evidence. The left does not have the moral high ground. The Democrats do not have the moral high ground for civil rights. They do not have the moral high ground for the progress made in society. They are stealing valor from actual heroes and parading it around. And this is done in tandem with the media and the entertainment industry. And the whole point is so that they can keep power. It's a very narrow electoral range that is keeping them winning elections at all. And this is by controlling the media and using sleight of hand, like a straw man argument, they're able to supposedly discredit memes like this one that are showing the facts. And since they can't win the argument, they have to resort to dishonesty, rhetoric, and intellectual sleight of hand.